Waiting on Facebook to kick in. There it finally goes. Facebook, Instagram, thank you so much for joining me on this fine afternoon or evening, depending where you are located. Tonight, I'm going to share with you my thoughts on how I specifically approach non-training day nutrition when working one-on-one with some of my wonderful clients. And there's a couple distinctions that I really want to hone in on this evening to give you some tools or some resources to better fine-tune your training day nutrition as well as your non-training day nutrition to make sure you're recovering well, you're performing well, and of course, if you're seeking a weight loss or weight gain goal, well, we're going to focus on weight loss today, that you are moving in the right direction. So the first thing is, let's acknowledge the obvious. If you are not training, you are burning significantly fewer calories than you would on a training day. Now, for some people who train 2.5 hours a day, this number of calories is quite extensive, and you need to keep that in mind. Whereas others, for instance, who may have a 40 or 50-minute boot camp class, you're burning a lot of calories on your training day, but the difference between training day and non-training day is not nearly as extreme for someone who is literally training for 2 or 2.5 hours. So let's acknowledge that because that's going to come into play when we discuss how to adjust your nutrition. Now, the general approach that most people take is focusing on carbohydrates. You're going to reduce your carbohydrates simply because carbohydrates are your muscle's primary energy source. You are not expending as much energy. You're not putting as much demand on your muscles on a non-training day. Therefore, you don't need as many carbohydrates. And protein generally stays the same. Fats may or may not stay the same. So those are some basic approach, or I should say that's the basic approach to handling non-training day nutrition. Well, let me give you some insight on what I precisely do with my one-on-one clients. The first thing is my clients will find they are typically eating one less meal per day. Well, not really, but they don't have that workout shake I'm so high on. And in that workout shake is some high quality whey protein. And when we remove that on a non-training day, I still like to put that protein back into action on or throughout their day. And the first thing I do, or the change I make is I add 1 ounce of protein to all 4 or 5 meals during the day. And there's a couple reasons I do this. Number 1 is to make sure they're still hitting their daily protein goal. Number 2, to make sure they're still hitting their specific meal protein goal, which is typically 25 up to 35 grams of high quality protein per meal. And then thirdly, to make sure they are feeling very satiated because of the positive impact protein has on one's appetite. Most people report feeling extra hungry on a non-training day compared to a training day, likely because their calorie intake is lower. So by having more protein at this meal or per meal, it helps them to better manage their appetite during the day. Now, with carbohydrates, what I like to do when I'm first starting out with someone, so we're not in an immediate deficit, we put carbohydrate intake at about 0.5 grams of carbohydrates per pound of body weight. So for instance, if I have a 150-pound female, I'm looking at about 75 grams of high fiber carbohydrates, but that is not factoring in the trace amount of carbohydrates she may get from her fat sources and from her vegetables. So really, that's probably closer of an estimate of 0.6 to 0.7 total grams of carbohydrates per pound of body weight. And of course, as we move forward with the dieting phase, that number is going to be reduced. Fat intake, I generally then like to take off anywhere between 10 and 20 grams of fat compared to a training day. So I've cut carbohydrates quite significantly, and this usually amounts to a 200 to 350 calorie reduction from carbohydrates, and then an extra, about 100 to 180 calorie reduction from fat. So you can see we're getting anywhere from a 300 to roughly a 500 calorie reduction between a training day and a non-training day. And that is pretty much my foundational approach. But here is where I like to really tweak things. Let's say, for instance, a new client I started working with is completing an Olympic weightlifting workout that takes her a total of 2 to 2.5 hours, 5 times a week. The volume is insane. The energy demands pre-workout and during the workout are insane, and her recovery energy needs are highly insane as well. And in order to help enhance recovery and prepare her for her subsequent day, I actually bring her rest carbohydrate or her non-training day carbohydrate intake up quite significantly. So to give you a number-based example, rather than being 0.6 to 0.7 grams of carbohydrates based on her body weight per day on a non-training day, I might bring that number up between 0.85 and 1.05 roughly. So closer to a gram of carbohydrates per pound of body weight. And I might drop fat slightly lower because, again, we do want to put her, make sure she is eating fewer calories than she would on a training day. But I want to keep carbohydrates high in order to make sure her glycogen stores throughout her body are very well stocked so she does not enter her next day at a suboptimal level of fuel, which is only going to have a negative impact on her performance and ultimately have her feel as if she's kind of digging herself out of a hole in terms of recovery the next few days. So again, to recap, someone who has an extensive, very high volume and very high frequency training regimen, I'm going to keep their carbohydrates much higher on a 9 training day versus someone who has more of a traditional 3 to 5 60-minute workouts per week regimen. And then again, to compensate for the increase in carbohydrates, I will bring fat down a little lower, again, to make sure she is consuming a little bit less calories on that non-training day compared to a training day. Now, a strategy I also like to employ if someone is reporting just, a really ravenous appetite is I'll kick protein up again another ounce per meal, typically resulting anywhere from 25 to 35 grams of protein more on that day. And again, that's really tackling that appetite, tackling satiety head on to make sure that they don't spend their off day, the one that's supposed to be filled with rest and relaxation, hangry as can be. So there you go, my approach to off-day nutrition in a nutshell. In future videos, we'll discuss off-day nutrition as it relates to being, 6 or 8 weeks into a diet or 6 to 8 weeks into a massing or muscle building phase. Questions, comments, concerns, comment below, send me a message. Otherwise, if you have a topic you'd love to hear me discuss, I'd love to hear it. So shoot me a message and let me know. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your evening, and I'll see you next week.